Hot nights shrink the condenser's temperature drop, raising back pressure on the turbine. Output falls exactly when the grid wants the gigawatt. Engineers can chase incremental gains, biocide cycles to keep tubes clean, optimized pump curves, polished vacuum systems, but they can't turn an 86-degree river into 74. The law makes physics binding. Section 316A limits thermal plumes to protect dissolved oxygen and habitat. 316B controls intake design to reduce fish impingement and entrainment. Finer screens and lower intake velocities save biology, but add hydraulic losses that nibble at condenser performance on the hottest days. Endangered species rules set minimum flows that can trump withdrawal plans. The plant's firmness becomes a negotiation with ecology, overseen by permits, with enforcement and courts in the background. When heat arrives, compliance isn't a checkbox, it's the lever that tugs a city's evening. Uprates expose the margin. Many reactors plan small power bumps to eke more megawatts from the same core. On paper, clean capacity. On the river, more heat to shed into the same sink. As summers warm, the headroom that made uprates feasible shrinks. Some projects stall not because the reactor can't handle it, but because the condenser and water body can't. The bottleneck isn't nuclear physics, it's thermodynamics meeting ecology at 5 p.m. Operators developed choreography after watching European rivers force curtailments. Start the morning assertive, then feather back before intake temps hit trip bands. Coordinate with the grid so demand response and air-cooled peakers cover the evening dip. Stage maintenance on the hottest weeks to mask unavoidable derates as planned. Put environmental monitors on open lines to adjust discharge within safe envelopes. It's not heroics, it's muscle memory for warm water. Finance priced the paradox. A gigawatt that vanishes at the margin loses revenue when scarcity premiums peak. Seasonal accreditation trims paper capacity unless plants can prove performance under heat. Hybrid cooling, wastewater tie-ins, documented condenser approach on hot nights. Insurers add riders for environmental curtailments. Lenders ask for intake temperature histories, discharge headroom, and basin drought outlooks. Inland sites with once-through cooling draw higher risk spreads. Hybrid or dry assist designs earn credit even with efficiency penalties. Can cooling be fixed? Dry and hybrid systems exist, but they're not free. Towers and air coolers cost capital, make noise, and shave efficiency hardest when air is hottest. Retrofitting a large legacy unit is a multi-year project. Wastewater reuse helps. Purple pipe municipal effluent feeding the circulating loop shifts stress off rivers, but needs treatment upgrades, pipelines, and politics. None of it is quick, and the heat arrives every summer. The human scene anchors it. A shift lead draws a narrow band on a whiteboard, safe condenser pressure here, trip there. The grid operator calls, I need your full nameplate at 6. The environmental monitor radios from a mile downstream, dissolved oxygen is tight, stay under your delta. The lead looks at the intake readout climbing by tenths and answers both. We'll hold just below the alarm. Reliability becomes restraint by design. Advanced designs try to dodge the trap. Small modular reactors promise lower absolute discharges, easier siting, and pairing with hybrid or dry cooling from day one. Some pitch co-location with wastewater plants, embedding the purple pipe in the business case. Others tout inland sites with colder aquifers or larger bodies that warm less. The idea isn't magic. It's starting with the sink instead of ending with it. You pay in efficiency and capital. You get megawatts that don't bargain with a river at dusk. Here's the paradox in one line. Nuclear is the steady bridge through long nights until water warms, flows thin, and the cold sink that makes the promise real starts to slip. The machine didn't change. The water did. And that means permits, law, and money now sit in the dispatch stack right next to physics. Law, permits, and the temperature trap. The next constraint isn't metal or fuel. It's a line in a permit that turns a warm afternoon into a hard ceiling. Under the Clean Water Act, Section 316A governs thermal discharges, 316B governs intake structures. Those numbers sound bureaucratic until a control room hits them at 4 p.m. and a city learns that biology, not gas supply, will decide the evening. Stakes first. That permit is the legal fence between megawatts and a living river. Cross a thermal limit and you risk fish kills, enforcement, lawsuits, and forced retrofits. For a hospital waiting to restart chillers, for a neighborhood stacked with window units, the paperwork becomes a throttle. Operators don't get to bargain with it, they plan around it. Here's how the trap tightens in heat. Thermal permits assume an ambient water temperature and allow only a small rise above it at the discharge, plus an absolute cap on outlet temperature. When a heat dome drags the river's starting point near that cap, the allowable delta collapses from degrees to tenths. A 1-degree rise on paper becomes 0.2 in practice. Plants trim output before they exceed it because the penalty for crossing isn't just a fine. It's a loss of trust and a risk of shutdowns that ripple for days. Intakes face their own law. 316b demands best technology available to protect fish and larvae, wedge wire screens, reduced intake velocities, modified structures. They work, but they add hydraulic losses that raise circulating pump load and nudge condenser performance the wrong way when air is already brutal. The fix for biology eats margin on the hottest days. No one designed it as a conflict. It's just where habitat protection meets thermodynamics. Then endangered species law and state criteria step in. Minimum ecological flows can override withdrawal plans. Several states layer tighter thermal rules during spawning or low flow periods, smaller allowed rises, lower seasonal caps. In drought years, that takes prudent derates and turns them into mandatory. A river corridor can go from legal cushion to legal thread in 24 hours. Operators try to earn flexibility. Some seek temporary variances for extreme heat, offering tighter monitoring, shorter durations, and downstream temperature checks. Regulators rarely say yes. Communities remember past kills, biologists bring dissolved oxygen charts, tribes lean on treaty rights, anglers show up with photos. An agency might grant a narrow window under strict conditions, but the default is to hold the line. The river doesn't get a do-over. So retrofit right. Cooling towers can convert once through to closed cycle, slashing withdrawals and easing 316b exposure. But towers add capital, noise, plume, and a new ledger, evaporative consumption that bites in basins already rationing. Hybrid or dry assist systems cut consumption, but hit efficiency hardest in hot air, exactly when you need output. Retrofitting a big unit is a multi-year project with new air permits, visual impacts, neighbors, and interlocks. It's a path, not a patch. Wastewater reuse is the quiet workaround. Tie a plant circulating loop to municipal effluent, and you shift stress off a river during heat alerts. It works if the city can spare flow in August, if treatment upgrades deliver the quality needed, if pipelines clear easements, if interagency politics align. In fast-growing metros, reuse has its own summer peak. A utility that signs early locks resilience. One that waits ends up in a bidding war with new customers and drought rules. Litigation stretches timelines. Environmental groups challenge variances. Utilities appeal permit terms. States and tribes assert water rights that reorder who dips a pipe first. Each filing pushes upgrades and derates into another season. Lenders watch and widen spreads. Insurers add business interruption riders for environmental curtailments. The cost of uncertainty shows up before a single bolt is turned. Markets are catching up. Accreditation used to treat a megawatt as a megawatt. Now summer capacity credits shrink for plants on warm rivers unless they harden. Hybrid cooling proven under heat. Signed purple pipe contracts. Demonstrated condenser approach on hot nights. A combined cycle that can show logs of performance at 86-degree intake earns. A once-through unit with stacked downstream neighbors gets discounted. The signal is simple: get legal, get dry, or get less credit. One scene explains the trap. A shift lead stares at a discharge thermometer brushing the cap, while a downstream biologist radios dissolved oxygen numbers. The grid operator asks for 10 more megawatts. The permit says trim 5. He trims. Frequency wobbles, prices jump, fish live, and the plant stays out of court. That's not caution, that's the system doing what the law designed it to do. Adaptive permitting can make this sane without gutting protections. Pre-qualify heat protocols in spring, verified hybrid cooling performance curves, wastewater reserves, automatic derate triggers at defined river temps, continuous monitoring with public feeds, and downstream coordination among stacked plants. In return, regulators allow minute-by-minute adjustments within a safe envelope. No last-minute pleadings, no Friday variances. Biology stays the line. Operations get predictability. Finance will enforce the rest. Require hydrology readiness, disclosures in dockets, 5-year intake temperature trends, discharge headroom, retrofit plans, and alternate sources. Publish them. Insurers and lenders will move spreads accordingly. Projects that treat water as a first-class constraint will clear. Those that hope for cooler rivers will sit. The trap doesn't disappear. It becomes a plan instead of a surprise. The $50 trillion number, where it comes from. We've been talking in gauges, degrees, and feet. Here's the bill that falls out when those numbers drive planning. That $50 trillion tag isn't a scare line. It's the multi-decade price of building a grid that doesn't beg a warm river for mercy at 6 p.m. Start with replacement value for summer firmness. Every thermal megawatt that evaporates under heat has to be replaced not one for one, but with portfolios that show up when water doesn't. That means sprawling, water-light generation, solar across latitudes, wind across regimes, plus storage that shifts noon into night and holds through multi-day heat domes. 4-hour batteries shave peaks. 8 to 12-hour systems bridge the ramps. Long duration fills the dead calm. You don't buy one plant, you buy an orchestra sized for August. Over 20 years, that stack runs into the trillions before you string a single mile of wire. Wires are the multiplier. Geography turns from trap to asset only if steel connects deserts, plains, coasts, and valleys. High-voltage DC backbones to move big blocks across time zones. Reinforced AC corridors that don't sag into constraints under heat. Right-of-way, permitting materials, labor, each mile is a project, and you need thousands. Put a price on a national lattice that can carry dry electrons to wet bottlenecks on queue, and you've added several trillion more. Delay costs double here. Every year you don't build becomes 5 summers of scarcity pricing downstream. Cooling retrofits land on a parallel ledger. Some legacy plants can survive with hybrid or dry assist, and with purple pipe wastewater feeding their loops. Towers and air coolers cost 9 or 10 figures per site and shave efficiency when air bakes. Wastewater tie-ins mean treatment upgrades, easements, and politics. Dozens of large units multiplied by real retrofit costs becomes another trillion-scale bucket if you only count what makes sense to keep. You'll still retire a chunk that can't pass physics, permits, and finance at once. Those retirements leave stranded value on balance sheets. Stranded assets hide the next line item. Once through plants on warming rivers, hydro contracts written on old hydrographs, uprates that hit condenser walls, write-downs and early closures push losses through rate cases or investor books. Add insurance premiums for environmental curtailments and business interruption, then add higher debt costs where risk disclosures admit heat-driven derates. 2 percentage points of finance spread on billions over decades quietly turns into hundreds of billions. The cost of uncertainty is real money. Demand-side capital is the cheapest dry megawatt and still isn't free. Thermal storage in buildings, chilled water tanks in schools, hospitals, campuses, pre-cools nights and sales through 4 p.m. retrofits for envelopes and controls in the hottest, poorest neighborhoods avoid the exact spikes that trip feeders. Industrial load flexibility, kilns shifted, batch processes moved, cold storage pre-chilled, turns factories into dispatchable assets. Cities digitize water plants and wastewater ops to ride alerts. Roll those programs across metros and states and you're spending serious money, less than peakers, far less than blackouts, but still measured in the hundreds of billions. Then there's siting and the premium for speed. Build where water risk is low and transmission is planned and capital flows. Build cheap in a drought corridor and you pay every August forever. The difference shows up as a lifetime tariff delta that ratepayers feel for decades. Accelerating everything, wires, storage, portfolios, carries its own premium. Overtime labor, parallel permitting teams, early-stage risk capital. Speed costs, delay costs more. Hydrology-proofing data centers is its own column. Air-side systems that auto-switch on heat alerts. Thermal storage big enough to coast through the evening ramp. Contractual demand response that behaves like generation. Wastewater hookups instead of fresh withdrawals. Multiply that by the campuses already in the queue, and you add tens of billions just to make the digital load ride a water away a grid without diesel. Water supply projects that free the grid from rivers sit in the background. Purple pipe networks, advanced treatment at reuse plants, and regional exchanges that route effluent to cooling and return potable to taps. All of it is civil works at city scale. These investments improve resilience beyond energy, public health, growth capacity, drought buffers. But they're part of the energy bill because they decide whether a hospital's AC leans on a river or a pipe. Policy turns dials and still can't erase physics. Credits for clean generation, storage, and transmission shave capital. Standards that force seasonal capacity accreditation steer portfolios toward dry reliability. Grants for building upgrades bring forward demand flexibility. But none of those replace the miles, the steel, the batteries, the towers, the tanks. They move cost from rates to taxes. They don't make the bill vanish. So how does this stack to $50 trillion? Add a decade of generation and storage builds scaled for August, plus a continent's worth of high-capacity wires. Layer cooling retrofits where they pass the math, retire what can't, write down stranded value, and pay the finance premium for risk. Fund demand-side hardware at city scale. Build water reuse where legacy plants must stay. Then carry those dollars through interest over 20 to 30 years while load rises from electrification and AI. You don't write one check. You build an asset base the size of the old grid, but tuned for heat and water. There's one last column we usually ignore, the price of doing nothing. That ledger shows emergency diesel, medical bills from heat stress, crop losses, fisheries crashes, litigation, outage damages, and a decade of summer price spikes, money burned with nothing built. Compare that to a grid that keeps ORs cold, servers online without diesel, trout alive, and bills sane in August. One path leaves receipts. The other leaves infrastructure that doesn't argue with a river. The number is large either way. Only one buys out of the trap. Map of risk, the hidden choke points of American power. Lay generation over hydrology and a different grid appears, drawn by temperature lines, reservoir elevations, and stacked permits. The choke points aren't substations, they're watersheds where cold is scarce exactly when people need it. Start in the southwest, where the Colorado River is both backbone and liability. Phoenix and Las Vegas sit on load islands that lean on Hoover and Glen Canyon for shape, not just energy. If Lake Mead drops near 1,035 feet, Hoover's effective capacity gets slashed, roughly 70% gone as a dozen turbines go quiet. If Lake Powell brushes minimum power pool near 3,490 feet, Glen Canyon turns cautious. Gas plants ring the metros, but many lean on reservoirs and recycled water with summer constraints. On the worst evenings, hydro arrives thin, thermals derate on warm intakes, and scarcity pricing climbs like the temperature. Geography writes the schedule, long heat, thin head, and load that refuses to sleep. Slide into Texas, where ERCOT's confidence meets lakes and relentless heat. Gas, wind, and solar share the stage. But still, hot evenings dull wind, sunset drops solar, and reservoir-cooled units feel intake temperatures creep. A few feet down on a droughted lake, a few degrees up in August air, and combined cycles trim just when the system needs them steady. Add humidity that blunts tower performance, and the hinge is clear. Thermal units become the last guardrail, narrowed by water. Cities from Dallas to Austin ride peakers and price spikes that say as much about lakes as about fuel. Head north to the Ohio, Tennessee belt, a quiet dependency most maps miss. Dozens of gas combined cycles and legacy units line warm, slow rivers. Permits cap both outlet temperature and the rise above ambient. Upstream plants use their legal delta. Downstream plants inherit that ambient as their starting point. In a heat wave, the ladder compresses. Each unit trims 5% to stay legal. Stacked across a corridor, you lose a virtual power plant with no alarms, just compliance. Humid nights kill recovery, towers start warm, and the next day's headroom shrinks before breakfast. Drop into the southeast, where broad rivers once looked infinite. Heat domes say otherwise. Once through stations hit intake temperature caps, recirculating units see towers stall when nights stay hot and wet. State criteria tighten during spawning windows, endangered species flows set hard minimums. Nuclear anchors can't ignore any of it.